2 days after I let the man who had spent 3 years trying to destroy my career call himself my partner, I learned something terrifying. Silas Thorne was dangerous with a title. Not dangerous in the old way, not with a camera, not with leaked security dossiers, not the kind of dangerous that made me double-check secure channels before authorizing a convoy. This was worse. This was the kind of dangerous that came through the encrypted safehouse comms pad at 6 in the morning with a picture of his heavily bandaged shoulder and a text message. Protection detail report. Still alive. I stared at the glowing blue screen for a full 5 seconds. The floorboards of the mountain cabin were freezing under my boots. Then another message appeared. Your VIP is very brave. I leaned my head back against the thick wooden door frame of the kitchen and covered my eyes with one hand. You took a piece of shrapnel from a drone strike, not a nuclear warhead, I typed back. His reply came through the secure network entirely too fast. Emotionally, it is the exact same thing. I should not have smiled. I absolutely smiled. That was the core of the problem right there. Everything had become entirely too easy to smile at. Hey everyone, before we get deep into this story, I want to know who is listening tonight. Drop your city or country in the comments right now. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, back to what happened at the safe house. The first day I took the shift at this remote mountain location, I did it because his collarbone was pinned together with surgical steel, and the director of operations had asked me to make sure our most volatile asset did not try to bleed out doing something stupid. That was a reasonable excuse, a professional excuse, a very tactical excuse. The second day, I stayed because our junior operative, Miller, wanted to see whether Silas could still recalibrate a drone feed with his non-dominant hand. That was also reasonable. Mostly. Miller had sat on the dusty rug of the safehouse living room with a specialized military tablet in his hands and the serious expression of a field commander. You are useless now, Miller said. Silas looked physically wounded by the statement. I am medically compromised. Miller nodded like that explained absolutely nothing. Still useless. As the head of personal security, I should have defended the man who was technically my partner. Instead, I laughed so hard from the kitchen counter that Silas stared at me like actual betrayal had walked through the reinforced steel door. You are supposed to be on my side, Marcus. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms over my tactical vest, trying to look entirely innocent. I am on the side of operational efficiency. Miller pointed at me immediately. See, the boss knows. Silas failed 3 decryption sequences in a row, blamed his painkillers twice, and still looked happier than he had any right to look, just because I was standing in the same room. At some point during the afternoon, when Miller went outside to check the perimeter sensors, Silas's good hand found mine resting on the back of the sofa. Not in front of Miller, not exactly. But I noticed. Of course I noticed. Silas did not hold on too tightly. He never did now. His long, ink-stained fingers simply rested against my knuckles, rough and warm, like he was asking a silent question he already knew I could answer however I wanted. I answered by turning my hand over. His fingers slipped between mine. The cabin kept existing. The wind kept howling against the blast-proof glass. The tactical radio kept humming with static. And my chest acted like Silas had just violated an international treaty. By the third day, I did not have a valid security excuse anymore. Silas sent a message over the localized network right after I finished my midday perimeter sweep. How is my security chief doing? I stared at the word my longer than a grown man in tactical gear ever should. Then I typed back. Your security chief is considering reassigning you to the Arctic branch. 3 dots appeared on the screen. Cruel. After everything I survived in that blast. I looked toward the small kitchen where Miller was rapidly packing field rations into waterproof containers. The radio buzzed again in my hand. I miss you. That was a tactical violation. Too direct, too soft, too Silas now. I held the heavy device against my chest for a second, like the ballistic plating would stop my face from doing something obvious. It did not. Miller looked up from his supply crate immediately. You are smiling at the asset again, boss. I am not. You are. The director's voice came from the doorway, sharp and sudden. He does smile differently now. I froze, every defensive instinct I possessed locked up. Miller's hand stopped halfway to a ration pack. I slowly turned to look at Director Vance. She stood there in her heavy winter coat, snow dusting her shoulders, calm in the most terrifying way a former intelligence officer could be. What? I asked. That sounded like an interrogation. Her smile was minimal. It was a calculated observation. Miller leaned forward over the crate like he had been waiting his entire short career for this exact moment. Silas is his partner. I almost choked on the frigid cabin air. Miller, what? He is. Vance's eyes moved to me, not shocked, not angry, just deeply analytical, warm but careful, the way she always looked when she knew there was an unfiled report hidden behind my stoic expression. The secure device buzzed again against my palm. Silas, do I get to see you in the main room today? My jaw clenched to maintain a neutral expression. Vance set her secure briefcase down on the wooden table. So, she began, much too precisely, how did you and our chaotic photojournalist really become so close? And just like that, the warmth in my chest vanished. For one full second, nobody in the cabin moved. Vance stood near the door with her hand resting on the table. Miller looked between us like he had accidentally stepped on a landmine and was waiting for the click. And I stood there, with Silas's message burning a hole through my hand, suddenly painfully aware that my entire demeanor had been compromised for days. How do we become close? My voice came out far too measured. That was a mistake. Vance's eyes softened by a fraction. You do not have to answer like I am conducting a hostile debriefing, Marcus. Miller lifted a ration pack. I would pay to watch that debriefing. I pointed a gloved finger at him. You are the reason I prefer working alone. He smiled down at the crate. Vance walked deeper into the room and unbuttoned her coat, but her attention remained locked on me. I just want to understand the dynamic. You've been pulling double shifts here. You never pull double shifts for low-level assets. My device buzzed again. Do I need to file an official requisition form for your company? I turned the screen against my tactical vest before Miller could catch a glimpse. Too late. His eyes narrowed. That was Silas. It was a perimeter alert. It was Silas. Your jaw did the thing. What thing? The muscle twitch thing you only do when he talks. I looked at Vance to restore order. She did not restore order. Traitor number 2. Instead, she folded her arms and gave me that piercing look, the one that did not force an answer, but made withholding the truth feel like a dereliction of duty. So, where did you two actually cross paths first? My throat went completely dry. There it was. Such a standard security question, the kind of question a superior was supposed to ask when her head of security started acting entirely out of character. Where did you meet? The press briefing in the Capitol. How did you know each other? He was there, in the briefing room, near the exit doors. sometimes standing with the journalists who mocked our operational failures, sometimes asking the questions that nearly got me fired. My chest felt tight. Not panic, not exactly. More like an old burn wound acting up in the cold. Vance's expression shifted by a millimeter. She noticed the hesitation. Of course she noticed. We knew each other from the Capitol circuit, I managed to say. Miller's hands stopped moving. The Capitol circuit? 3 years ago? I nodded once, sharply. Vance watched me with the intensity of a sniper. I did not realize that. Because I never put it in my file. Because back then, saying his name out loud would have made my professional humiliation too real. Because I'd spent 3 years trying to keep Silas Thorne and his damning photographs in the same locked vault as the rest of my operational regrets. And now he was sending me messages about missing me. Now he was my partner. The universe had terrible timing. Vance did not press for more details. That should have made me feel secure. It did not. Her silence carried weight, not judgment, concern. The kind of concern that meant she valued me too much to be lied to easily. I slipped the device into my tactical pouch. I'm going to check the northern sensors. Miller opened his mouth. I gave him a look that could freeze water. He slowly closed it. Excellent survival instinct. Outside in the snow, I stood against the heavy logs of the cabin and breathed in the freezing air. For a few moments, I just let the cold bite my lungs. Then I pulled out the device. Silas had sent one more encrypted ping. Marcus? That one word dismantled my defenses, not because it was dramatic, because it was careful. Like he could sense the shift in the air pressure from 3 rooms away. I leaned against the frozen wood and typed. The director is asking questions about you. His reply took slightly longer this time. Not long, just long enough for my heart rate to spike unprofessionally. What did she ask? How we became close, how we know each other's background. I stared at the bright text, then typed the part I despised admitting. I am worried she will pull me off this detail if she knows the history. The message transmitted. I immediately wanted to throw the device into the snowbank. No snowbank was deep enough to hide my lack of professionalism. The typing indicator appeared, vanished, appeared again, and then Silas finally responded. She has every right to question my presence here after what I did to your reputation. My grip on the device tightened. Another text followed. But I am not walking away from this because the optics are bad, Marcus. I read the words twice. The wind howled through the pines. A third message arrived. I will stand my ground with you, no matter who asks. Something heavy in my chest finally cracked open. Not completely, but enough that my shoulders dropped their defensive posture. I let my head rest back against the logs. You write that like it is a simple procedure, Silas replied instantly. It is not simple. It is just the truth. That was incredibly unfair. He could not keep deploying sentences like that, not while I was trying to remain a hardened security professional with strict emotional perimeters. Before I could formulate a response, another ping sounded. Also, this medical bed is very uncomfortable. I blinked at the screen, then another. Tragically uncomfortable. And another. If only someone's partner came to inspect it. I let out a breath that turned into a visible cloud in the cold air, fighting a smile. There he was, arrogant, ridiculous, dangerous with a title. I typed back, "Do not abuse the security protocols." His answer was immediate, "Too late." I looked up at the gray sky and lost the battle with my own face. My thumbs moved before my tactical training could stop them. "Fine, I will come to the medical room." A brief pause, then I added, "I miss you too." The reply materialized so quickly it felt like a system error. "Am I heavily medicated, or did you just say that?" I secured the device, checked my sidearm out of habit, and walked back inside the cabin. Miller was crossing the narrow hallway with a heavy duffel bag over one shoulder. He looked at me. I looked at him. A knowing grin started forming on his face. I lifted one gloved finger. "Do not speak." Miller held up his free hand. "I am not interrupting the security check. I have perimeter duties." That was highly suspicious. "With who?" I asked. "The backup team on the ridge." I narrowed my eyes. "So you are not being a professional. You are avoiding the director." He pointed at me like I had cracked an enemy cipher. "Exactly." For once, I accepted the tactical retreat. In the main room, Vance was reviewing files. I told her I was going to assess the VIP's medical status. She looked up at me for one long, silent second. Then she gave a slow nod. "Maintain your objectivity, Marcus." I almost confessed everything right there. Almost. Instead, I adjusted my vest. Always. And as I walked down the dim corridor, I realized the hardest part of letting Silas in might not be forgiving him for the past. It might be asking the people who trusted me to understand why I did it. By the time I reached the heavy door of the medical room, I had already run through several disaster scenarios in my head. 1. Vance somehow already possessed a file on my relationship with Silas. 2. Vance somehow had surveillance of me kissing Silas in the armory. 3. Vance had both and was currently drafting my resignation. 4. Silas would look at me with that ridiculous smirk, and I would forget every protocol I had sworn to uphold. Scenario 4 was the highest probability threat. I stood outside the door for a moment, my hand hovering over the handle. My device vibrated. "Silas, are you standing in the hallway calculating risks?" I looked at the heavy wood door, then at the screen. "How do you know my position?" His reply came without hesitation. "Partner instinct." I closed my eyes. This man was a severe breach of my peace of mind. Before I could formulate a reprimand, the door clicked open. Not Silas. A field medic stepped out, wiping her hands on a towel. She looked slightly startled to see me looming there, but her expression quickly smoothed out. "Chief, I did not know you were taking the medical check today." That was a standard statement. It felt like an accusation. I maintained my neutral posture. I was in the sector. No, that was a terrible lie. We were in a cabin. There were no sectors. Her eyebrows elevated slightly. I corrected myself with military precision. "I mean, Silas requested an assessment. He needs to prepare for transport eventually, and since his shoulder is still compromised," I gestured toward my own shoulder in a completely unhelpful manner. The medic looked at me for a quiet moment, then a small smile appeared. "That sounds like our VIP." Relief washed over my system. Almost. Because then her eyes locked onto mine with far too much perception. "You have been very patient with him, Chief." The words landed softly in the quiet hallway. Too softly. I looked past her shoulder toward the room. "He is a wounded asset. That is a factual statement." She draped the towel over her shoulder but did not step aside. And you two have a history? There it was. Not a threat, not an interrogation, just a medical professional observing the commanding officer who kept volunteering for low-level watch duties. I swallowed dryly. Yes, we have a history. History. What a vague, useless classification. History could mean we shot at each other. History could mean we survived a blast together. History could mean Silas had called himself my partner while bleeding out in a transport helicopter, and I had squeezed his hand instead of administering a sedative because I liked the sound of it too much. The medic's expression remained neutral, but the intelligence in her eyes told me my cover was thin. Well, she finally stepped past me. I adjusted his bandages. The pain meds are wearing off. Please make sure he does not try to rearrange the equipment before I return. I almost let out a laugh. He has not followed a single directive since extraction. Good luck, Chief. She pointed a finger toward the room. Do not let him lift anything heavy. I will physically restrain him if necessary. And if he says the pain is 0, he is lying. Her smile widened. You really do understand his operational tactics. That should have felt like a professional compliment. It felt personal. Unfortunately, she tapped my armored shoulder as she walked away. Keep your guard up, Marcus. I will. When her footsteps faded down the hall, I stood alone in the dim light and let out a long, controlled breath. That went adequately. Probably. Potentially a disaster. I pushed the heavy door open. Silas was sitting on the edge of the medical cot, dark gray tactical shirt cut open to accommodate the massive white bandage across his chest and shoulder, dark hair falling into his eyes, and a smile so bright it belonged in a different environment entirely. Hello, partner. I missed my security detail. My entire rigorous training regimen evaporated. We saw each other 4 hours ago. Silas leaned back carefully against the wall like he had been plotting this exact moment just to dismantle my composure. And we communicated over secure channels 5 minutes ago, I countered. His smile did not waver. You know my communication needs, Marcus. I stepped into the room, forcefully attempting not to smile back. I know you are exploiting a security classification. Only because it is my favorite one. That was a direct hit to my chest. I closed the door behind me before my expression could be logged as evidence. The room was quiet in a way that made the isolation feel profound. Medical monitors humming, a heavy wool blanket pushed aside, the low sound of the wind rattling the reinforced window. Ordinary safe house things. Yet the anxiety from Vance's questions followed me into the room like a hostile shadow. Silas noticed immediately. His trained observer eyes never missed a shift in my posture. His smile vanished. Hey. I stopped at the foot of the cot. His uninjured hand reached out toward me, then paused in the air, always waiting for clearance, even now. I closed the distance, stripping off my heavy tactical glove, and let my bare fingers wrap around his hand. The tension in my jaw released slightly. Not entirely, but enough. Silas's thumb traced the rough calluses on my knuckles. Status report? I looked away toward the medical tray. Do not act like you have psychological clearance. His mouth curved. I do not. I just have partner clearance. I let out a heavy sigh. You are an operational hazard. And I am in pain. That pulled my attention back sharply. I scrutinized his face. You need another dose? Silas looked toward the medical tray with the calculated innocence of a man about to commit fraud. I was delaying it. For what tactical reason? His dark eyes returned to mine, warm and entirely shameless. For my security chief to assist me. I stared down at him. You mean you want a nurse? Silas looked profoundly insulted. I require a dedicated partner. I should have issued a verbal warning. Instead, a low laugh escaped my throat. And just like that, for one terrifying second, I forgot the danger of our situation entirely. The medic had left a sealed ration meal on the side table. I inspected it. High protein stew, dry biscuits, a brutally efficient meal. I looked over my shoulder. Medical staff feeds you like you are heading back to the front lines. Silas sat still, his injured side braced carefully, looking far too victorious. They worry about my mass. They should. You have already attempted to weaponize your injury to manipulate my schedule. His eyes crinkled. I prefer to call it strategic deployment of affection. I leveled a stern look at him. You are going to make me regret authorizing that title. No, I'm going to make you realize how essential it is. That was the exact variable that kept me awake at night. I opened the container, stirred the hot stew, and placed it on the tray table in front of him. Then I set a spoon down next to his good hand. There, execute your meal plan. Silas looked at the tray, then at the spoon, then up at me. His expression transformed into something tragically helpless. I crossed my arms over my chest armor. Absolutely not. I have not spoken a single word. You broadcasted your intent with your entire posture. His mouth twitched. My posture is heavily compromised. Your left shoulder is compromised. The rest of you is fully capable. Emotionally, I am incapable of feeding myself. I tighten my jaw. Do not laugh. Maintain discipline. Silas attempted to pick up the plastic spoon with his left hand. He managed it, barely. Then he looked at me like lifting the utensil was a Medal of Honor achievement. I maintained my stance. You can consume calories. I can suffer through the pain. You are an impossible human being. Your partner is highly adaptable. I snatched the spoon from his fingers and scooped a small amount of stew. This is a breach of professional boundaries. Silas leaned forward slightly, triumph dancing in his eyes. Affirmative. I fed him the bite. Highly irregular, completely irrational, and absolutely not something that made my pulse accelerate. Silas chewed slowly, maintaining eye contact, like I had just handed him a classified secret instead of freeze-dried stew. I pointed the spoon at his face. Do not stare at me with that expression. His gaze softened dramatically. What expression? Like I am executing a critical mission. But you are. My hand froze midair. The medical monitors beeped softly in the background. The room went silent for 2 seconds too long. I looked down at the plastic container and focused on scooping another perfectly measured portion. I focused on it because my hands needed a physical task to prevent them from shaking. I am feeding you military rations. You walked in here. His voice dropped to a lower frequency, not teasing. That was infinitely more dangerous. I kept my visual focus on the tray. You sent a distress signal like a stranded recruit. I missed the sight of you. I needed a tactical response, something sharp, something authoritative. Instead, the heavy armor around my chest felt like it was melting. I lifted the spoon again. Consume your rations before I throw them in the snow. Silas complied, but the soft look in his eyes remained. For a short window of time, the routine became dangerously comfortable. Food, quiet banter, Silas pretending his good arm lacked motor skills whenever he wanted my attention, me pretending I was aggravated when my heart rate proved otherwise. The terrifying part was how quickly the anxiety of my career dissolved when I was in his proximity. In the main room, Vance's scrutiny felt like a physical threat. Here, Silas's quiet presence made the threat feel manageable, not neutralized, just distant. After the meal, I disposed of the containers while Silas remained on the cot like a man who had been ordered to hold his position. I could feel his eyes tracking my movements. I felt the weight of his stare before I turned around. Report. Silas blinked slowly. Nothing to report. You were conducting surveillance again. I like my current view. That is not a valid defense. It is an honest assessment. I wiped my hands on a tactical towel, and the heavy words I had been carrying since the morning perimeter check pushed against my ribs. My composed expression fractured before I could reinforce it. Silas registered the shift instantly. The playful demeanor vanished from his face. Marcus. I gripped the towel until my knuckles turned white. Director Vance initiated an inquiry about you today. His posture became rigid, not defensive, not evasive, just bracing for impact. She wanted a detailed timeline of how we became associated, how we knew each other in the capital. Silas looked down at the white bandages across his chest for a long moment, then back to my face. And you felt cornered. I hated that his psychological profiling of me was so accurate. I hated it significantly less than I used to. I leaned back against the cold steel of the medical cabinet. I cannot falsify reports to her indefinitely, but if she connects you to the security breaches from 3 years ago, my throat constricted. I am worried she will never trust you anywhere near me again. Silas's features hardened into something quiet and intensely painful. She is entirely justified to view me as a threat. Silas, stop. No. His good hand rested palm up on the sterile white sheet. I destroyed your professional standing back then. Even if my ideology changed, even if I took that shrapnel for the team, the damage I did to you does not evaporate just because you decided to forgive me. The words hit the room with heavy, blunt force. But there was no malice in them, only brutal honesty. I looked down at his open hand, always leaving the perimeter open, always giving me the choice to withdraw. I crossed the room and placed my calloused hand firmly into his. Silas closed his fingers around mine with a desperate heat. I will not retreat from this, Marcus. His dark eyes locked onto mine, intense and unyielding. If your director views me as a hostile, I accept that. If I have to earn my clearance level day by day, I will execute the mission. I already transmitted my position to you. I am not abandoning this post just because the terrain is rough. My chest ached, a deep, resonant ache, the kind that signaled the arrival of something permanent. I gripped his hand tighter. You state that like it is a standard operating procedure. His thumb dragged across my knuckles. It is not standard. Then the corner of his mouth lifted slightly. But I am highly motivated. I exhaled a breath that sounded suspiciously like a laugh. Acknowledged. Silas looked at me like that single sound was the most critical intel he had gathered all year. Like breaking my stoicism was his primary objective. And perhaps that was the core of my fear. Not that keeping him close was a logistical nightmare, but that standing next to him made every impossible obstacle look like a minor inconvenience. His grip on my hand did not loosen. For one foolish, unguarded moment, I almost let myself believe the hardest phase of the operation was complete. It was not. There was a chain of command waiting on the other side of this door. "There is an additional variable," I muttered, my voice low. Silas's thumb stopped moving. "Specify." I glanced toward the heavy wooden door, half expecting Vance to breach the room with a stack of disciplinary forms and perfect tactical timing. The director. His expression shifted. Not fear, not precisely, more like he had been anticipating this specific engagement. Confirmed. I sat down heavily on the edge of the cot, the mattress groaning under my armor, our hands still locked together. She asked if we had a history. Silas let out a slow, measured breath. "Oh, understood." His mouth formed a tight line. "I have not submitted formal disclosure yet. That I am your partner." A faint flush of color hit his cheekbones. "That you are my partner. That I am committed to this detail." My brain halted all cognitive functions for one microscopic, useless second. Not because the intel was overwhelming, because hearing it vocalized made it undeniably real. Silas broke eye contact for the first time since the briefing began. "I know we are in the initial phases. I am not trying to accelerate the timeline. But I refuse to operate in the shadows like you are a classified secret I should be ashamed of." My heart executed that painful, heavy maneuver again. I should have issued a sarcastic reprimand. That would have maintained the perimeter. Instead, I sat rigidly, my throat closed, anchoring my hand to his. Silas looked back at me, his eyes dark and resolute. "I will submit the disclosure to her whenever you give the green light. I am a grown man. I own my actions." I swallowed hard. "And if she revokes your access?" His face remained stoic. "Then I will hold my position outside the wire." My stomach twisted violently. "And if she pulls the files from the Capitol?" His eyes held mine, unwavering. "Then I will confirm every single failure on my record." That response should have triggered my flight instincts. It did. But it also forced something deep inside my chest to settle into place. Because he was not promising a casualty-free extraction. He was promising he would not abandon the mission. And maybe that was the exact reassurance my system required. "I do not want this to become a hostile engagement immediately," I whispered, the sound barely carrying over the monitors. Silas's expression softened into something devastatingly gentle. "Copy that. We hold our current position." I stared down at our joined hands, scars, calluses, and an impossible amount of trust. "I think we need to initiate a tactical relocation." Silas blinked, his analytical brain processing the shift. Relocation? Before Vance starts running deep background checks and Miller starts placing bets on our operational status. A genuine laugh broke from Silas's chest, bright and unexpected. Miller would absolutely monetize that intel. He would demand a cut of my hazard pay. Silas smiled, but his gaze remained locked on my face. "You want to extract?" "I think we require a secure location. Not a permanent withdrawal, just—" I squeezed his hand firmly. "A secure perimeter for us." Silas looked down at the heavy bandages wrapping his torso. I recognized that specific calculation in his eyes. Before he could formulate the sentence, I raised one eyebrow. "I am a certified evasive driving instructor." His eyes darted back to mine, attempting a look of complete innocence. "I never doubted your vehicular proficiency. That micro-expression is a threat." "What micro-expression?" "The one that precedes a highly irregular request." Silas straightened his posture slightly, wincing as the movement pulled his shoulder. "Requesting permission to suggest an alternate route." I crossed my arms, suddenly deeply suspicious. Proceed with caution. His face turned almost hesitant. That was a completely undocumented behavior for him. Do you copy the coordinates for the old hunting cabin near the ridge? I stared at him, running the mental map. The abandoned structure? Sector 4? He looked mildly sheepish. I secured the entry codes from the local rangers before the assignment. It is off the grid, unmonitored. And you are disclosing this intelligence now? You never requested alternate extraction points. That was an infuriatingly valid argument. I narrowed my eyes to slits. So this is the operational strategy. Lure the security chief to an isolated location. Silas leaned forward, a dangerous spark of hope igniting in his dark eyes. My physical limitations do require constant supervision. Affirmative. But mostly his devastating smile returned, softer and more lethal this time. I want my partner in a secure room. That tactic had no right to breach my defenses twice in one day. It breached them effortlessly. I looked away toward the frost-covered window before my face compromised my authority entirely. That is a highly manipulative deployment of facts. Marcus. Negative. I reject your argument. It relies heavily on isolation, my inherent need to protect, and unauthorized partner privileges. I cleared my throat sharply. Do not utilize that terminology. His smile became a weapon of mass destruction. Then escort me to the cabin and enforce the regulations yourself. I stared at him, at the heavy white bandages, at the dark, hopeful eyes, at the rogue operative who used to make my blood boil with rage, and who now looked at me like my authorization code could alter his entire existence. Perhaps it could. I let out a harsh breath. Approved. Silas froze. Approved. We extract to the ridge. Primarily because your shoulder requires a stable, low-stress environment. His face lit up with an intensity that rivaled a flare gun. Primarily? I pointed a rigid finger at his chest. Do not test the boundaries of my patience. Silas looked more triumphant than a man with a shattered collarbone ever should. I will follow every directive flawlessly. You look far too pleased to be compliant. I am experiencing high morale. The raw honesty in his voice dismantled the last of my armor. I stood up, the heavy gear shifting on my shoulders, and leaned over the narrow cot. Silas looked up, momentarily startled by the sudden proximity. This time, I bypassed the risk assessment entirely. I kissed him. Firmly at first, establishing contact, then lingering as his good hand came up to grip the heavy fabric of my vest. When I finally broke contact, his eyes were blown wide, dark and hazy. I smiled, a genuine, unguarded break in my stoicism. We initiate transport tomorrow at 0600. Silas exhaled a shaky breath like he had been holding it since the mission began. Copy that. And you are restricted from carrying any equipment. His infuriating smile returned. Acknowledged, partner. I closed my eyes, resigning myself to my fate. This was a catastrophic breach of protocol. But when he laughed, a quiet, breathless sound in that sterile medical room, I knew it was the most correct decision I had ever made. Initiating the extraction the next morning was significantly more complicated than anticipated. Not because Silas resisted orders. He did not. He navigated the safe house corridors with his injured arm strapped securely to his chest, wearing civilian winter gear, and carrying that same quiet, victorious expression. The expression that made me want to abandon my post. The expression that made me want to ignore Vance's looming presence, the impending debriefings, and every tactical complication waiting outside the fortified doors. I grabbed the keys to the armored transport vehicle. Silas's good hand brushed against my tactical glove. Not an attempt to stop me, just a physical ping to confirm connectivity. 0600, he murmured. I looked at him. He was attempting to project calm confidence. His elevated heart rate was practically visible. We are on schedule, I confirmed. His smile widened slightly. You are actually authorizing this relocation? Because you are a medical liability, confirmed, and because you lack the spatial awareness to survive without an escort. His eyes warmed, melting the winter chill. Acknowledged. I pointed the heavy key fob at him. Stow that expression immediately, unable to comply. That was a flagrant violation of discipline. I should have ordered him into the transport immediately. Instead, I closed the distance and kissed him once more. A rapid, tactical strike. A disastrous lapse in judgment if I intended to maintain my commanding officer persona. When I stepped back, Silas looked like he had just been handed the nuclear codes. Enter the vehicle, I ordered softly. Secure your harness. His mouth curved in a perfect salute. Yes, boss. I turned away before my internal systems completely failed in front of the surveillance cameras. The transport drive felt surreal. My physical form was executing defensive driving maneuvers on the icy mountain roads, but my cognitive focus was already mapping Silas's secure cabin, calculating sight lines, perimeter checks. The fact that there was only one heat source, one defensible room, that final variable almost caused me to miss a hairpin turn. Negative, I muttered under my breath, correcting the steering wheel sharply. My neck still flushed with heat. We stopped at the base camp to retrieve emergency supplies. Vance was standing near the armory, reviewing a logistics manifest. I secured the vehicle and approached her, my posture rigidly professional. Director, I am moving the VIP to Sector 4 for specialized isolation. Vance looked up slowly from the manifest. The hunting cabin? Affirmative. The current safe house has too much foot traffic. His recovery requires zero interference. She studied my face for a prolonged, agonizing moment. No backup detail? I am fully equipped to handle his security and medical administration. I maintained eye contact, refusing to blink. Vance's pen tapped against the clipboard. Very well, Marcus. Maintain calm silence unless it is an absolute emergency. Understood. As I turned to leave, her voice cut through the freezing air. Marcus. I stopped, my boots crunching on the hard-packed snow. Do not let your past history blind you to present risks. My jaw locked. It will not, Director. I returned to the armored transport, the weight of her warning sitting heavily between my shoulder blades. Silas was already strapped into the passenger seat, wearing a thick wool coat over his sling. He watched me climb into the driver's seat and secure my weapon. You survived the interrogation, he noted. Barely. I engaged the heavy diesel engine. I pulled out of the base camp, the massive tires gripping the ice. Silas activated the secure radio with his good hand. I need to transmit a status update to the network before we lose signal. I kept my eyes locked on the treacherous road, feigning disinterest. That lasted exactly 12 seconds. Yes, Miller, we are en route. A pause. No, I am not navigating. Another pause. Silas glanced at me, amusement dancing in his dark eyes. The chief is operating the vehicle. I gripped the steering wheel tight enough to stress the leather. I could hear Miller's chaotic static through the speaker. Silas looked down at his heavy boots. Negative. I am not touching the comms array. Marcus already threatened me with physical restraint. I turned my head just a fraction of an inch to deliver a lethal glare. Silas smiled, a devastating, brilliant smile, a partner smile. Yes, Miller, I will ping you when we reach the coordinates. He terminated the transmission and leaned back against the headrest like an operative who had successfully bypassed a hostile checkpoint. Your junior officer is highly anxious, Silas observed. I kept my focus on the snow-covered pines blurring past the windshield. So is my director. That was a direct hit. Too direct. For the next hour, we navigated the winding mountain roads in a comfortable, heavy silence. The kind of silence that still threw my internal alarms off balance, because silence with Silas Thorne used to mean he was compiling data to ruin me. Now it meant the perimeter was secure. Then I detected it, a subtle shift in his breathing. He was smiling again. Not an overt display, something covert, the kind of expression an operative wears when executing a classified personal objective. I utilized the rearview mirror. You are displaying unauthorized positive emotions. Silas did not even attempt evasive maneuvers. Affirmative. That was alarmingly transparent. His uninjured hand rested on his knee, his fingers tapping a slow rhythm. I have been calculating the odds of this outcome for a long time. Of returning to a secure cabin? Of being stationed with you? The armored cabin of the vehicle suddenly felt suffocatingly hot, a complete failure of the climate control system. I shifted my grip on the wheel. That intel is highly volatile. Silas's dark eyes remained fixed on my profile. Minor risk, maximum reward. I should have issued a formal reprimand. I should have reminded him that this was a medical evacuation, that the cabin was a tactical necessity, that we were seasoned professionals executing a protocol. Instead, my biometric responses betrayed me. I felt a flush of heat rise above my tactical collar. Silas processed the data instantly. Of course he did. His smile expanded. Marcus, I am maintaining radio silence. You were preparing to issue a counter-argument. I was preparing to state that I am enduring a significant tactical disadvantage. A disadvantage? Isolating yourself with your severely injured, highly persuasive partner must be a grueling ordeal. I nearly drove the massive vehicle into a snowbank. You are an absolute menace. Do not make me initiate an emergency stop. Silas released a low, rumbling laugh and turned to watch the snow fall against the reinforced glass, looking entirely too satisfied with his psychological warfare. For 2 hours, the navigation was flawless. Then the atmospheric conditions deteriorated rapidly. Heavy gray clouds descended over the mountain pass, thick and impenetrable. The first flurries hit the windshield, quickly escalating into a blinding whiteout. Within minutes, the treacherous road vanished under a sheet of ice and snow, and the roar of the blizzard drowned out the hum of the diesel engine. Silas's amusement faded into sharp awareness. Status? I engaged the heavy-duty fog lights, downshifting the transmission. Visibility is dropping below acceptable parameters. The secure comms crackled with a localized weather broadcast. Severe whiteout conditions detected. Sector 4 access roads compromised. All personnel advised to shelter in place. Silas looked across the console at me. I maintained a death grip on the wheel. We are pushing through. He did not object. That silent trust felt heavier than the armor I wore. 30 agonizing minutes later, the silhouette of the abandoned hunting cabin materialized through the driving snow. I forced the transport into the hidden clearing, the tires spinning wildly before finding purchase near the heavy timber porch. I killed the engine. The sudden silence inside the cab was deafening, replaced only by the screaming wind outside. I unbuckled my harness and turned to him. We move fast. I am going to assist you. Do not attempt to be a hero. Silas nodded, his face pale from the jarring ride. Acknowledged. We breached the heavy wooden door of the cabin together, fighting the gale force winds. The interior was freezing, smelling of ancient pine, dust, and isolation. I secured the deadbolts behind us, plunging us into the dim, shadowy quiet of the single main room. I activated my tactical flashlight, sweeping the perimeter. One room, one massive stone fireplace, one small table, and one heavy, rustic wooden bed frame sitting in the corner, holding a single, thick mattress. I stood near the reinforced door, the heavy duffel bag slung over my shoulder, staring at the bed like it was a hostile explosive device. Silas stepped forward, shedding snow from his coat, and followed my beam of light. He processed the layout. Then his mouth twitched. I turned sharply before he could articulate a single syllable. Negative. His eyes widened with highly trained, artificial innocence. I did not transmit a message. You were projecting loudly. I was assessing the structural integrity of the safe house. You were assessing the sleeping arrangements. His smile became lethal in the dim light. It is a highly efficient use of space. I pointed my flashlight toward the dusty floorboards, and there is a significant perimeter of hard wood available for a sleeping bag. Silas looked down at the floor, then back at me, instantly deploying his most devastating weapon, the tragic casualty expression. With my shattered collarbone? You are weaponizing the injury. I am utilizing available assets. That is worse. Outside, the blizzard slammed against the reinforced logs, a brutal reminder of our total isolation. I dropped the heavy duffel onto the table and began extracting emergency lanterns, attempting to normalize the fact that I was trapped in a single room with the man who accelerated my heart rate to dangerous levels. It was not normal. Nothing about Silas had been normal since he bled out in my arms 3 weeks ago. Or perhaps nothing about my own rigid protocols had been normal since then. I cleared my throat, the sound harsh in the quiet room. I am establishing a fire. You hold your position. Silas sat carefully on the edge of the heavy mattress, keeping his injured arm protected. Execute your orders, Chief. I paused with my hand on the kindling. For a microsecond, the cabin faded. A storm. A high-value target. Me, furious and terrified and petty enough to let the fire burn low because Silas Thorne had deserved at least one freezing night for the hell he put me through years ago. I looked back at him over my shoulder. You calculated this. Silas's smile turned quiet, almost vulnerable. I calculated the probabilities when I saw the weather report. I just hoped the logistics worked out. I pressed my lips into a hard line. You are a tactical nightmare. I am. The admission caught me entirely off guard, not because of its volume, but its absolute sincerity. Then the corner of his mouth lifted again, softer. But my loyalty is secured now, correct? I stared at him for a long, heavy moment. The thick bandages, the exhausted lines around his dark eyes, the careful, patient way he waited for my validation instead of demanding it. Affirmative. His smile warmed the freezing air like a physical heat source. I turned back to the fireplace before my internal monitors failed completely. The fire caught quickly, casting long, dancing shadows across the log walls. It raised the ambient temperature, but not enough to neutralize the tension. When I stood up 20 minutes later, shedding my heavy tactical vest and gloves, Silas was still seated on the edge of the bed, precisely where I had stationed him. I frowned, rolling my shoulders. Why have you not changed out of your damp gear? His uninjured hand lifted slightly. Because I am strictly adhering to protocols. Which protocol? His dark gaze dropped to his bandaged chest, then slowly rose to meet my eyes. The tragic expression was gone, replaced by raw necessity. I require assistance. I stiffened. With what? I cannot bypass the thermal layer over the bandages without compromising the sling. I stared at him. The fire popped loudly in the grate. I crossed the room, every footstep feeling entirely too loud, and stood before him, attempting to maintain my professional detachment. I am intervening strictly for medical preservation. Understood. Do not make this a psychological operation. I will endure the procedure in silence. You are a catastrophe. I stepped directly into his space and reached for the hem of his heavy, damp thermal shirt. The cabin fell completely silent, save for the wind. Silas tilted his head down to grant me access, and I carefully gripped the fabric, pulling it up and over his good arm first, then executing a slow, agonizingly gentle maneuver around the injured shoulder. Tactical, medical, necessary. Then the heavy fabric came off, and my cognitive processing unit completely crashed. Silas was not trying to project dominance. That was the most devastating part. He just sat there, dark hair cast in the golden firelight, his torso heavily strapped with stark white medical gauze, looking up at me with absolute, unshielded trust, while my eyes committed the catastrophic error of mapping the hard lines of his chest, the heavy scarring from previous operations, and the lean muscle of his stomach. I realized my visual sweep had halted. Silas realized it simultaneously. His right eyebrow elevated a fraction of an inch. Not arrogant, worse, deeply, quietly amused. I initiated immediate verbal panic. Do you require me to administer a sedative as well? The moment the transmission left my mouth, my soul attempted to self-terminate. Silas froze. I turned completely rigid. Then I raised both hands in a universal gesture of surrender. Belay that order. That was a localized error, a catastrophic verbal misfire. I am initiating a communications blackout. For one terrifying second, Silas looked like he was suffering a massive internal hemorrhage trying to suppress a laugh. Then he stood up, moving slowly, still clutching his discarded shirt. I can manage the lower half of my uniform. Acknowledged. Unless my highly efficient security chief decides to override that protocol. I snatched a clean medical towel from the duffel bag. Turn around, now. I executed a tactical retreat toward the fire, staring into the flames while he changed into dry sweatpants. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Oh my God, I muttered to the fire. What did you just transmit, Marcus? The storm raged outside. The single bed remained, and my infuriating partner was standing 3 feet away. This was going to be an agonizingly long deployment. Silas moved back into my peripheral vision, wearing dry clothes, his heavy sling readjusted. For a second, my training failed me. I just looked at him. He lifted his uninjured arm slightly. Before you issue another dangerous directive, I just need help securing the secondary bandages. My neck burned with heat. My comms are permanently disabled. That would be a tactical loss. It would ensure my survival. Silas smiled, a soft, lethal expression, and stepped into my perimeter. I took the medical tape from the kit and focused fiercely on the physical mechanics. Secure the gauze, avoid applying pressure to the collarbone. Maintain zero unnecessary visual contact. Unfortunately, my eyes refused to follow the chain of command. Silas intercepted the glance. Of course he did. But this time, he deployed no countermeasures. He simply lowered his head, allowing me better access to his shoulder, trusting my hands not to inflict pain. That breached my defenses completely. The silent trust, the absence of his usual armor, the way he allowed me to operate in his most vulnerable space without turning it into a battle of wits. When the final strip of tape was secured, I stepped back, my breathing shallow. Rest. Silas immediately sat down on the edge of the single mattress. Too immediately. I narrowed my eyes. You comply with suspicious speed when it serves your objectives. His mouth curved in the firelight. I value the care provided by my commanding officer. I dropped the medical tape into the kit. You should not broadcast that intel so recklessly. His voice dropped, losing all traces of humor. You have no idea how crucial it is to have you at this coordinate, Marcus. My hands stopped moving. The howling wind filled the space between us. Not a hostile silence, just heavy enough to make the small cabin feel like the entire world. I looked down at him, the firelight catching the dark intensity in his eyes. I'm registering the intel. Silas reached up with his uninjured hand and wrapped his fingers securely around my thick wrist. Not a restraint, just an anchor. His eyes locked onto mine, burning with a sincerity that stripped the oxygen from the room. I meant every transmission earlier. My muscles tensed involuntarily. I acknowledge. Regardless of Vance's threat level, regardless of the agency, regardless of our operational history. His thumb pressed into the pulse point at my wrist. I am not abandoning this position. My chest violently contracted, a sharp, beautiful pain, the kind of pain that precedes total surrender. I sat down heavily beside him on the mattress before my legs failed their structural integrity checks. Silas shifted his weight, wincing slightly, turning his body toward mine. I refuse to let you operate in isolation again. That was the precise decryption key that unlocked the vault. Not an explosive breach, a quiet, inevitable opening. I leaned forward, the space between us vanishing, and wrapped my arms around his solid frame, careful, agonizingly careful of his shattered shoulder. Silas went completely rigid for a fraction of a second, then his good arm encircled my back, gripping the heavy fabric of my shirt. A solid, unyielding hold. A safe house I had never factored into my logistics. I am holding the line with you, I whispered roughly against his neck. Silas pulled me a fraction closer, burying his face in my shoulder. The kiss initiated slowly, no frantic movements, no tactical urgency, no ghosts of our past hostilities standing in the room holding weapons. Just Silas, just me. Just the brutal storm outside and the profound, terrifying peace of voluntarily dropping my shield for someone else. When we finally broke contact, the proximity remained. His hand stayed locked onto my wrist, hot and steady, like even after the breach, he was still requesting permission to remain inside the perimeter. His breathing was erratic. My pulse was a chaotic rhythm. I looked down at his long fingers gripping my wrist, then up at his face. Silas. His eyes searched mine, pupils blown wide in the dim light. Copy. The intel was difficult to vocalize, not because the data was corrupted, because the stakes were absolute. I am not executing a tactical retreat from this. He stopped breathing entirely, I swallowed hard, forcing the words out before my training could censor them. I am holding this position with you, permanently. Not because the weather grounded us, not because we share a safe house. My voice dropped to a gravelly whisper, because you are my primary objective. Silas did not smile immediately. He deployed no sarcasm. He did not rush the perimeter. His grip on my wrist simply shifted, his fingers tangling carefully with mine. Confirm your coordinates, Marcus. That specific verification protocol almost made my chest cave in. It did. I nodded, a sharp, definitive movement. Coordinates confirmed. His eyes softened, the tension draining from his rigid frame like a neutralized threat. Then we advance at your pace. The fire cracked loudly in the stone hearth. The storm battered the heavy logs of the cabin, and when Silas leaned forward to close the distance again, I abandoned my post and met him halfway. The remaining hours of the night required no mission reports. They belonged to quiet, encrypted promises, to careful, mapped movements, to the long stretches of silence where Silas analyzed my expressions before initiating any advancement, to the exact moment my threat assessment protocols deactivated and I realized I was not compromising my security. I was authorizing the only person capable of defending it. By the time the blizzard exhausted itself outside, leaving a brutal, silent white world in its wake, I had already finalized the after-action report in my mind. The Capitol had tried to destroy my career. The past had tried to break my trust, but they had not compromised my future. Because that morning, in an unmonitored cabin I had never officially requisitioned, beside the operative who had once been my greatest liability, I finalized the alliance. And for the first time in my decorated career, I felt zero anxiety about the consequences of my orders. The extraction team would arrive eventually, so would Vance, so would the sprawling network where Silas and I would have to execute this new protocol in broad daylight. But for now, the perimeter was perfectly secure. So, that is the complete file. What is your assessment? Did I make a catastrophic tactical error, or would you have authorized the same extraction? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you want to hear more classified files like this, hit that subscribe button. Stay secure, everyone.